Ever since the generations of Adam, the world has been corrupted. Wherefore God wrote a Bible warning us about the Greek kingdom and how they will create an Abrahamic religions, which basically hijacked his word and placed it within their mosques, churches, and synagogues, all in an attempt to dilute you and take you away from the very first commandment, which is put no other God above the God of Israel, God of Abraham, God of Isaac. In other words, they want you to pray to the Son of a Man. They want you to pray to imaginations within the sky. Hence, let's read what the Most High has to say. It is the duty of all government officials, religious leaders, and local dignitaries who enjoy the trust and confidence of the public to promote, continue, and improve all that is healthy in our community life and discourage harmful practices and attitudes. Haile Selassie I. In other words, don't change its beginning. Because in the beginning, this is the book of the generations of Adam, the day that God created man. In the likeness of God made he him. In other words, there is no man with two right arms and one big leg. Male and female created he them and blessed them and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. In other words, Adam means couples. It is said, Lord, he unto me, even so also is Israel portion, because for their works I made the world, when Adam transgressed my statutes. Then were the entrances of this world made narrow, for the entrances of the elder world were wide and sure. They that live labor not to enter, they can never receive those that are laid up for them. So, O Lord, the righteous should inherit these, but the ungodly should perish. So who are the ungodly? The ones that's changing up his words. So let's watch what they're doing.
In the 1800s, European missionaries came into Africa to preach their version of Christianity, especially in Ethiopia. For an example, the missionary Harry Aaron Stern started preaching the European form of Christianity to the Ethiopian Jews in 1862. This was during the time when Tedros II was Emperor of Ethiopia. As is also mentioned in the Caesar Magdala book, on page 13, it mentioned the Emperor Tedros II vented his frustration and humiliation on the Anglican missionary Henry Aaron Stern, who had been active among the Ethiopian Jews, Falashas, since 1859. Stern made himself a suspect not only by the photographic equipment he had brought with him, but especially by the good relations with the Abuna Salama, the patriarch of the Ethiopian,
who was a Coptic leader. In other words, he was down with the Greek kingdom, because basically the Greek kingdom sent their missionaries there in the form of three different religions, all in the name of Christianity. So if you go to Ethiopia right now, you will find Roman Catholicism, you will find Protestants, and you will also find those from Alexandria. So the Pope sent his missionaries. So let's read. Alexander the Macedonian, first over Greece, beat Darius, the king of the Persians. Therefore, Iran, Iraq, and Syria are under the Greek kingdom. Also, you will find Rome and Jerusalem and Egypt. So what did they do? At the end, they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. So if you go to Ethiopia right now, you will find some of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed onto idols. So if I go to Ethiopia right now, I will find churches with white paintings of Jesus. Let's watch how they're
They hold
changing
an
the
ancient
story.
Bible with 81 books, not 66. And inside those extra pages is a resurrection account that changes the very definition of God, death, and the human soul.
Notice it said resurrection account. Ethiopia itself does not follow BC AD on their calendar, because that was made up in 525 AD by an Iranian monk. In other words, Ethiopia does not follow that crucifixional story, but the church, which was implanted by the Greek kingdom, changed the stories and brought back a repackaged account. Let's watch.
81 books that change everything. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has the largest and most diverse biblical canon in history. They have 81 books. That is 15 more than the Protestant Bible and 8 more than the Catholic version.
Haile Selassie only approved 72 books. So Haile Selassie version of the Bible contains a narrower canon, and it was only translated from Ge'ez. In other words, it's not from Hebrew or original Greek or any of that. It's just from Ge'ez itself. So look what it says. The Bible was written by God. That's why it says the Bible was breathed out by God. In other words, God himself wrote the Bible. But this is what they did. They added on to the story. And keep adding it on and using Ethiopia's name.
Testament, there is literally zero mention or even the vaguest reference to Jesus' life.
The Bible has a massive plot hole. 18 missing years in the life of Jesus. From age 12 to 30, he vanishes. But what if those years were never missing? Tucked away in the Ethiopian highlands, an ancient gospel written in a forgotten language describes a young Jesus with unimaginable power. This text, part of an 88-book Bible, shows him healing, commanding, and even wielding the power of life and not life.
You see how they're mixing in their crucifixional story to Ethiopia? So who did that? There go the author of the Kebra-Nagus. So a lot of people take his folklore as if it's reality. But Haile Selassie said, yo, our list of kings goes back all the way to 4470 or 4530 BCE. In other words, way before Menelik. So Ethiopia did have a king called Menelik in 957 BC, but he was not the son of Solomon and Sheba. Why? Because they're supposed to be here in the latter years. As the Bible says, after many days thou shalt be visited, in the latter years thou shalt come into the land against the mountains of Israel, and there you will find Sheba. In other words, she was not here 3,000 years ago, according to the Kebra-Nagus with Solomon. In other words, she's supposed to be here in the latter years. Who's also here in the latter years? Jesus. So this Jesus was the son of Sirach and grandchild to Jesus, who lived in the latter times. In other words, they created an Old and New Testament format, put the future in the past, and having you follow them. So let's see what they did. In the first quarter of the 16th century, they started writing manuscripts about the Kebra-Nagus. But it wasn't published till 1813. But in reality, modern scholarly opinion is that there is no historical evidence supporting the legends relating to the claims or the origins of the Solomonic dynasty mentioned in the Kebra-Nagus. There is no credible basis to the claims that the Aksumite royal house was descended from Solomon. Haile Selassie told us that the story was just our story. In other words, it's not based on reality. Part 1. Jagai.